The HOA cops smugly watched as the tow truck hooked up the pickup, confident they had won. They had no idea that the truck's owner, Mike, was the chief of police. What happened next shattered their plans to pieces. But let's start from the beginning. The sun had just begun to rise over the roof of Mike Donovan's cozy two-story house, casting a warm golden hue across its facade. The street was quiet, disturbed only by the occasional sound of cars passing on the nearby road. It was a typical peaceful American suburb, where every house looked well kept, and the lawns were trimmed with almost military precision. Mike had parked his Ford F-150 in the driveway, just as he had for years. The pickup was far from new, but it was well maintained, solid, reliable, and a survivor of more than a few police operations in the past. Its silver body gleamed in the sunlight, and the small scratches and dents told their own stories. This was a vehicle driven by a man who didn't sit behind a desk but worked in the field. Mike knew this neighborhood like the back of his hand. He had lived here for over 15 years, knew every neighbor by name, helped when needed, and always kept an eye on things. But even he never imagined he'd one day have trouble, right on his own doorstep. He had just poured himself a fresh cup of coffee when a loud, insistent knock sounded at the door. Not the doorbell. A knock. Demanding, almost authoritative. Mike let out a quiet sigh, set his mug on the table, and made his way to the door. The moment he opened it, he immediately knew. His morning was just beginning, but his day was already ruined. Two people stood on his porch, Douglas Hanks and his wife, Linda. Douglas was the stereotypical HOA president, slim, well-groomed, with neatly trimmed gray hair, dressed in an expensive gray suit, white shirt, and dark blue tie. There was a mix of smugness and authority in his eyes, and the thin smirk stretching across his lips only reinforced it. Linda, his wife, looked like she had just stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Perfectly styled blonde hair, flawless makeup, and a crisp white blouse. She clutched a folder of documents, holding it as if it were a weapon capable of crushing anyone who dared defy the rules. Douglas, in a condescending tone, "Mr. Donovan, your pickup truck is in violation of HOA regulations." His voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable tone of superiority, as if he were addressing someone too ignorant to understand how things should be done. According to the new guidelines, only vehicles that meet the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood may be parked in driveways. We have no choice but to issue you a fine. Mike raised an eyebrow, barely suppressing a smirk. He had encountered hundreds of people like Douglas in his career, power-hungry types who loved throwing their weight around, even if that power only extended to a neighborhood committee. Mike, calmly, arms crossed. "Seriously? I've lived here for 15 years and no one's ever had a problem with my truck before." Linda clutched her folder tighter, her smile cold and insincere, devoid of any real friendliness. Linda, patronizingly, "The rules have changed, Mr. Donovan. HOA now enforces stricter regulations. If you don't remove your vehicle within 24 hours, it will be towed." Mike locked eyes with her, then shifted his gaze to Douglas. "Mike, and this is what you call taking care of the neighborhood?" Douglas, smirking. "It's called following the rules." It was clear Douglas was enjoying this. This wasn't just about rules. This was personal. HOA hated when someone defied their authority, especially someone with actual power, someone who, in their minds, was used to getting away with things. Mike had two options at that moment. Option 1, pull out his badge, remind them who actually enforces the law, and shut this nonsense down immediately. But option 2? That one was far more interesting. Mike decided to see just how far they were willing to take this. The next morning, Mike woke up early, as usual. He never needed an alarm. Years on the force had trained him to rise with the sun. Making his way to the kitchen, he brewed a strong cup of coffee, enjoying the rich aroma as he moved toward the window. Then he saw it. His face remained calm, but his expression hardened. A bright yellow notice was plastered to his windshield. The words, "Violation, HOA regulations, subject to towing," written in bold red letters. But that wasn't the worst part. Mike's frown deepened as his gaze dropped lower, to the bright orange boot locked onto his front wheel. He took a slow sip of his coffee, never taking his eyes off the scene in front of him. He was processing just how far these two had decided to go. Mike, quietly setting his mug down. All right. He wasn't surprised. He had expected this. But what infuriated him was how they had done it. Without warning, without a warrant, and without any legal grounds. This wasn't just about a stupid truck anymore. This was personal. Mike stepped outside, standing on his porch, arms crossed. A few minutes later, a tow truck rolled up the street, coming to a slow stop in front of his driveway. The driver was a burly man in a work uniform, the kind of guy who probably didn't care whose truck he was towing, just another job for him. But the passengers? They were enjoying every second of this. Douglas Hanks and Linda. Douglas, still in his flawless gray suit, now carried himself with unshaken confidence. He thought he had won. His stride was firm, his chin held high, and his eyes glowed with triumph. Linda walked beside him, still holding her folder of documents, but now she also had her phone out, quickly typing something. Mike watched them approach. They weren't even hiding their satisfaction. Mike took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. Mike, calmly staring them down. "You've taken this too far." Douglas smirked, crossing his arms. Douglas, mockingly, "You brought this on yourself, Mr. Donovan. Rules are rules. Even people like you don't get special treatment." Linda stepped closer, her eyes flashing with excitement. Linda, smugly, "We warned you yesterday. Now your truck is being impounded." She slowly raised her phone and snapped a picture, the click of the camera echoing in the morning silence. That click was the last straw. Something snapped inside Mike. He had let them play their game, had let them take it as far as they wanted. But now? Now, it was his turn. He took a deliberate step forward, closing the space between himself and Douglas. Mike, quietly, locking eyes with him. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Douglas held his ground, but there was hesitation now. Douglas, forcing confidence. "Absolutely, Mr. Donovan." His smirk widened. "Rules are rules." Mike nodded, Mike smirking back. "Good. Then let's play by the rules." It was time to show them who really enforced the law. A light morning breeze rustled the trees along the street, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Douglas and Linda stood near the tow truck, certain of their victory, but the look in Mike's eyes was no longer the calm patience he had shown before. Without a word, he pulled out his phone, dialed a short number, and spoke calmly. "This is Chief Donovan. Send a patrol to my house immediately." Douglas and Linda exchanged uneasy glances. Their smug smiles started to fade. Douglas, nervously chuckling. Why do you need the police, Mr. Donovan?" Linda, forcing a laugh, gripping her folder tighter. Yes, this is just an HOA issue, not, well, not a crime." Mike didn't answer. He simply slid his phone back into his pocket and crossed his arms, watching them. 5 minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air. 2 police cruisers with the emblem of the local police department turned onto the street and came to a smooth stop in front of Mike's house. The doors swung open, and 2 officers stepped out, young guys in uniform, clearly not expecting a scene like this. One of them, a lean officer in his 30s, scanned the situation, looking from the tow truck to Mike, then over to Douglas and Linda. Officer, blinking in surprise. "Chief? Is that your truck?" Mike, calmly. "Yes. And these two are trying to have it illegally towed." Douglas's face turned ghost white, as if all the blood had drained from his body. Douglas, stammering, Wait, we're just following the rules." Linda swallowed hard and took a step back, her confidence disappearing in an instant. Mike moved deliberately, reaching into his pocket. Without a single wasted motion, he pulled out his badge and police ID, flipping them open for Douglas to see. Mike, voice steady, almost lazy but firm as steel. "You're breaking the law." The air grew heavier. "Towing a private vehicle from private property without a court order? That's a criminal offense." Linda's face turned gray, and she clutched her folder like it was a life raft. Linda, mumbling, voice trembling. We didn't know." Mike, staring directly at them. "You should have known. You love rules so much." Douglas shook visibly. He was no longer the smug HOA official throwing his weight around. He was just a frightened bureaucrat with nowhere to run. He cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly, his hands fumbling for something, anything to hold on to. Then, with a forced smile, he tried to salvage the situation. Douglas, nervously, voice cracking. "Listen, maybe we can, work something out?" Mike smirked. Not a friendly smirk, but a cold, knowing one. The kind that made it clear. "You're done." Mike. "Oh, absolutely." He stepped closer, locking eyes with Douglas. "I'm writing you up for illegal interference with private property." The officers immediately pulled out their notepads, ready to file the violation. Mike, continuing, calmly. "And HOA will be receiving a formal investigation request." Douglas exhaled sharply, like someone had just punched him in the gut. Linda squeezed her eyes shut, realizing that everything they had tried to do was now crumbling to pieces. Mike, glancing at their panicked faces, voice casual but firm. "Something tells me your little committee won't have much authority after this." Douglas opened his mouth, but no words came out. Mike turned to the officers and nodded. "Book them." Now, he was the one setting the rules. The tow truck's heavy tires rolled back as it pulled away, leaving Mike's pickup right where it belonged, on his driveway. The sound of the engine rumbled through the quiet street, but nobody moved. Douglas and Linda stood with slumped shoulders, their smugness completely evaporated. Douglas's face, once full of confidence and superiority, now looked like a man who had lost everything. Linda, still clutching her folder, looked like she wanted to disappear on the spot. Mike crossed his arms and looked at them. Mike, calm but firm. "I hope you finally understand that rules apply to everyone, not just the people you choose to control." His voice wasn't angry or vengeful, just matter of fact. Linda looked away, lips trembling. Douglas swallowed hard but said nothing. He knew he had lost. News of the incident spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Residents, many of whom had suffered for years under HOA's ridiculous fines and power trips, were now paying close attention to everything the committee did. Complaints poured into city officials, and within a week, a full-scale investigation into Douglas and his inner circle was launched. In a panic, HOA scrambled to revise their rules, hoping to save face. But it was too late. The public backlash and exposed violations led to the inevitable. 2 weeks later, Douglas was forced to resign. For health reasons, he claimed in an official statement. But everyone knew the truth. He had lost the power he had abused for so long, and the city breathed a sigh of relief. Neighbors, who had once feared fines for improperly colored lawns or visible house numbers, felt free for the first time in years. Nobody was afraid anymore. And Mike? He just went on living as he always had. Every morning, his pickup sat peacefully in the driveway, right where it belonged. And every time he walked past it, he smiled, because order had been restored.